Millionaire gets his maid pregnant and kicks her out of the house right away. But 9 years later, everyone was speechless with what she did. Subscribe to the channel to follow more exciting stories like this one. The early morning fog rolled across the manicured lawns of Blackwood Manor, a Victorian mansion nestled in the prestigious St. John's Wood area of London. Emma Bennet adjusted her simple black uniform as she made her way through the servants' entrance, her sturdy shoes barely making a sound on the polished marble floors. At 27, she carried herself with a quiet dignity that belied the weight of her responsibilities. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 6 times as Emma began her daily routine, starting with drawing the heavy velvet curtains in the main sitting room. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, illuminating the antique furniture and family portraits that lined the walls. The Blackwoods had occupied this house for generations, their wealth and influence growing with each passing decade. Emma's thoughts drifted to her mother, Catherine, who lay in their modest flat in Hackney, battling a chronic illness that required expensive medications. Her younger siblings, Tom and Lucy, still needed support for their education. At 16 and 14, they were bright children with dreams bigger than their circumstances. Every pound Emma earned went towards keeping their small family afloat. "Miss Bennet," a deep voice interrupted her thoughts. Emma turned to find Alexander Blackwood standing in the doorway, his tall frame casting a long shadow across the Persian rug. At 42, he cut an imposing figure in his bespoke suit, his dark hair touched with distinguished grey at the temples. As the CEO of Blackwood Industries, he commanded respect in London's financial district. "Good morning, Mr. Blackwood," Emma responded, lowering her eyes respectfully. "I wasn't aware you'd be home today. Shall I prepare your study?" "Please do," he said, his grey eyes lingering on her face a moment longer than necessary. "I'll be working from home this week. Ensure I'm not disturbed." Emma nodded, her heart beating a little faster as she felt his gaze follow her out of the room. Over the past few months, she'd noticed a shift in their interactions. Small moments of attention, brief conversations that stretched longer than necessary, the occasional brush of hands when she served his tea. In the kitchen, Mrs. Hudson, the housekeeper, was already preparing breakfast. The older woman had taken Emma under her wing when she started working at Blackwood Manor 3 years ago. "Everything all right, dear?" she asked, noting Emma's flushed cheeks. "Yes, Mrs. Hudson. Mr. Blackwood will be working from home this week. He's requested his study be prepared." "That man," Mrs. Hudson clucked her tongue, "always changing his schedule without notice. How's your mother doing?" Emma began arranging Mr. Blackwood's preferred breakfast items on a silver tray. "The new treatment is helping, but the costs—" She trailed off, not wanting to burden others with her concerns. "You're a good daughter, Emma. Your mother's lucky to have you." The morning progressed with its usual rhythm of tasks, but Emma couldn't shake the awareness of Alexander Blackwood's presence in the house. She'd caught him watching her several times as she went about her duties, his expression unreadable but intense. That afternoon, as she delivered tea to his study, he called her name just as she reached the door. "Emma, wait!" She turned, surprised by his use of her first name. He stood from behind his massive mahogany desk and approached her. "How long have you been working here now?" "3 years, sir. And always so dedicated," he said softly, standing closer than propriety would dictate. "I've noticed your hard work, your grace under pressure. You're different from the others." Emma's breath caught in her throat. The air between them seemed to crackle with unspoken tension. "Mr. Blackwood, I should return to my duties." "Of course." He stepped back, but his eyes held hers. "We'll speak again soon, Emma." That evening, as Emma made her way home on the Underground, her mind whirled with conflicting emotions. The attention from Alexander Blackwood was both thrilling and dangerous. She thought of her mother's medical bills, her siblings' school fees, and the constant struggle to make ends meet. The weight of her family's needs pressed heavily on her shoulders. In their small flat, she found her mother awake, sitting in her favorite armchair by the window. Catherine Bennet's face lit up at the sight of her eldest daughter. Despite her illness, she remained the family's emotional anchor. "You look troubled, love," Catherine observed as Emma kissed her cheek. "Just tired, Mum. How are you feeling today?" "Better. Tom got full marks on his maths exam, and Lucy's been accepted into the school choir." Emma smiled, her heart swelling with pride and love for her family. This was why she worked so hard. why she endured the long hours and demanding nature of service in a wealthy household. Yet as she prepared dinner for her siblings, Alexander Blackwood's intense gaze lingered in her mind, promising something both tempting and treacherous. Little did Emma know that her carefully ordered world was about to change forever. Set in motion by forces beyond her control, the safety of routine and the comfort of knowing her place in the world would soon be challenged, testing her strength in ways she never imagined. The following weeks at Blackwood Manor took on a dreamlike quality. Alexander's presence became a constant, his business trips mysteriously reduced to brief day meetings in the city. Emma found herself looking forward to their small interactions, even as her conscience warned her about the dangerous path she was treading. One rainy afternoon, as Emma arranged fresh flowers in the conservatory, Alexander appeared in his casual weekend attire, a sight few ever witnessed. The grey cashmere sweater softened his usually stern appearance, making him seem more approachable, more human. "These arrangements are beautiful," he commented, touching a pale pink rose. "You have quite the artistic eye, Emma." "Thank you, sir." "Mrs. Hudson taught me the basics of flower arranging when I first arrived. Always so modest," he smiled, moving closer. "I've been meaning to ask, how is your mother? I couldn't help but overhear your conversation with Mrs. Hudson about her medical treatments." Emma's hands stilled on the flowers. "She's managing, sir. The new medications are helping, but they're quite expensive. It must be difficult supporting your family on your own." His voice was gentle, understanding. "I admire your dedication." Before Emma could respond, he reached into his pocket and withdrew an envelope. "I'd like to help, Emma. Consider it a bonus for your exceptional service." Her cheeks flushed as she saw the amount written on the check inside. It was enough to cover 3 months of her mother's medications. "Mr. Blackwood, I couldn't possibly—" "Please." He touched her hand, sending electricity through her veins. "Let me help you." That moment marked a shift in their relationship. Over the next few weeks, Alexander's kindness manifested in various ways. Additional bonuses, questions about her family's well-being, and lingering conversations that grew increasingly personal. One evening, as Emma served tea in his study, he asked her to stay. "Tell me about your dreams, Emma. Surely you don't plan to remain in service forever." She hesitated, then sat in the chair he indicated. "I've always loved cooking. Sometimes I imagine having my own little restaurant, nothing fancy, just good, honest food that makes people happy." "You're far too talented to spend your life serving others," he said, his grey eyes intense. "You deserve more." The grandfather clock struck 9, making Emma jump. "It's late, I should go—" "Stay." He caught her hand as she rose. "Please." What happened next felt both inevitable and surreal. His kiss was gentle at first, then increasingly passionate. Emma knew she should pull away, maintain professional boundaries, but the warmth of his embrace and the promise of security he represented proved too powerful to resist. That night marked the beginning of their secret relationship. Alexander was careful, arranging their meetings when the house was empty, sending other staff on errands to create moments of privacy. He showered her with attention and gifts, a delicate gold necklace to match your lovely eyes, a silk scarf to keep you warm on your commute, and more discreet envelopes containing amounts that made Emma's head spin. At home, the benefits of Alexander's generosity were immediately apparent. Catherine's health improved with access to better medications and treatments. Tom and Lucy got new school uniforms and the textbooks they needed. Emma told her family the money came from a raise and extra hours, ignoring the guilt that gnawed at her conscience. Hudson noticed the changes in Emma, the designer scarf, the new shoes, the spring in her step, but kept her concerns to herself. Only once did she attempt to warn her young friend. "Be careful, dear. Men like Mr. Blackwood, they live in a different world from us." Emma brushed off her concern, convinced that Alexander was different. In quiet moments together, he spoke of his unhappy marriage to Victoria Blackwood, who spent most of her time at their country estate in Sussex. He shared his loneliness, his desire for genuine connection, making Emma feel special and understood. The weekend Victoria returned to London for a charity gala. Emma watched from the shadows as Alexander played the perfect husband, his arm around his elegant wife's waist. Victoria Blackwood was everything Emma wasn't. Refined, sophisticated, born to wealth and privilege. That night, Emma cried herself to sleep, but when Alexander sought her out the next day, his kisses and promises washed away her doubts. Spring turned to summer, and Emma found herself living in two worlds. In one, she was the dedicated daughter and sister, the reliable housekeeper who kept Blackwood Manor running smoothly. In the other, she was Alexander's secret passion, the object of his desire and affection. She told herself the deception was worth it for her family's security, for the way Alexander made her feel precious and valued. But as summer waned, Emma began experiencing morning sickness. At first, she denied the possibility, attributing her nausea to stress and irregular meals. But when her uniform began to feel tight around the waist, she could no longer ignore the truth. The pregnancy test in her tiny bathroom confirmed her worst fears, and suddenly, the precarious balance of her two worlds began to crumble. Standing in front of her bathroom mirror, Emma touched her still flat stomach with trembling fingers. The consequences of her choices loomed before her like a gathering storm. She had to tell Alexander, but fear kept her silent. Would he stand by her? Would he cast her aside? The weight of her secret pressed heavily on her heart as she prepared for another day at Blackwood Manor, knowing that soon everything would change. The autumn morning dawned grey and cold as Emma made her way through the servants' entrance of Blackwood Manor, for what she didn't know would be the last time. Her heart pounded against her ribs as she clutched a small envelope containing the ultrasound image she'd received the day before. At 12 weeks pregnant, she could no longer delay telling Alexander the truth. The house was unusually quiet. Victoria had returned to Sussex after another brief London appearance, and most of the staff were occupied with their morning duties in the East Wing. Emma found Alexander in his study, reviewing documents with his reading glasses perched on his nose, an intimate detail she'd grown to know well over the past months. "Emma," he smiled, removing his glasses, "I wasn't expecting you this morning. Mr. Blackwood, Alexander," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "I need to speak with you about something important." His expression shifted, noting her formal tone. "Of course. Close the door." Emma's fingers fumbled with the envelope as she approached his desk. "I've been trying to find the right way to tell you this." She placed the ultrasound image before him. "I'm pregnant." The silence that followed seemed to stretch for an eternity. Alexander picked up the image, his face unreadable. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost all its previous warmth. "How far along?" 12 weeks. He stood abruptly, running a hand through his silver-streaked hair. "This is unfortunate. Very unfortunate indeed." He moved to the window, his back to her. "What do you expect me to do about this situation?" Emma felt as though she'd been doused with ice water. I thought you should know. We need to discuss." "There's nothing to discuss." He cut her off, turning to face her. His grey eyes, once so tender, had turned to steel. "You understand this can't continue. The position I'm in, my family's reputation—" "I'm not asking for your reputation." Emma's voice grew stronger, protective instincts for her unborn child surging through her. "But this baby deserves—" "I'll arrange for a generous severance package," he interrupted again, returning to his desk and pulling out his checkbook. "Enough to help you. Resolve this situation discreetly." The implication of his words hit Emma like a physical blow. "You think I came here for money? To blackmail you? Didn't you?" His laugh was bitter. "Why else would you keep this condition? You must have known this would never work." Tears burned in Emma's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "Because I foolishly believed you when you said I was special, that what we had was real. We had an arrangement that benefited us both." Alexander's voice turned cold, businesslike. "Now that arrangement needs to end. I'll have HR process your termination immediately. Of course, you'll be asked to sign a non-disclosure agreement. And if I refuse?" His expression hardened. "Emma, be reasonable. Think about your family, your mother's medical bills, your siblings' education. I can make life very difficult for you if you choose to be problematic." The threat, thinly veiled beneath his polished exterior, made Emma's blood run cold. She thought of her mother, her siblings, everything she'd sacrificed to protect them. But looking down at the ultrasound image still lying on his desk, she knew she had one more person to protect now. "Keep your money," she said quietly, straightening her spine. "And your threats. I didn't come here to extort you, Alexander. I came because I thought you deserved to know about your child. I see now that was a mistake." She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. "If you think anyone will believe your story over mine, you're more naive than I thought. I have resources, Emma. Connections. Finding new employment will be challenging." Emma's hand trembled on the doorknob, but her voice remained steady. "Goodbye, Mr. Blackwood." The walk through the manor's corridors felt surreal, as if she were moving through a dream. In the kitchen, Mrs. Hudson took one look at her face and pulled her into the pantry, away from prying eyes. "Oh, my dear girl," she whispered, holding Emma as she finally let her tears fall. "I was so afraid this would happen. I have to leave," Emma managed between sobs. "Right now I can't stay here." Mrs. Hudson pressed a piece of paper into her hand. "My sister Sarah runs a small restaurant in Greenwich. Go to her. Tell her I sent you. She's always looking for help in the kitchen." Emma clutched the paper like a lifeline. "Mrs. Hudson, Hush now." The older woman pressed a kiss to her forehead. "You're stronger than you know, Emma Bennett. Remember that." Within an hour, Emma had cleared out her small locker in the servants' quarters. As she walked through the iron gates of Blackwood Manor for the last time, autumn leaves swirled around her feet like her scattered dreams. The weight of her phone in her pocket seemed to grow heavier with each step, knowing she would have to explain to her family why she'd suddenly lost her job. But beneath her fear and heartbreak, a small spark of determination began to grow. She might have lost her income, her reputation might be at risk, but she still had her dignity, and now she had someone else to fight for. Touching her stomach gently, Emma squared her shoulders and headed toward the underground station. She would find a way forward. She had to. The Riverside restaurant in Greenwich was a far cry from the opulent halls of Blackwood Manor. Housed in a converted Victorian warehouse, its exposed brick walls and wooden beams gave it a warm, welcoming atmosphere that immediately put Emma at ease. Sarah Hudson, a shorter, rounder version of her sister, took one look at Emma's tear-stained face and whisked her into the back office. "My sister Mary called ahead," Sarah said, pushing a cup of chamomile tea into Emma's hands. "You'll start tomorrow, 6 a.m. sharp. The morning prep crew needs an extra pair of hands." Emma blinked in surprise. "Just like that? You don't need references or—" "Mary's word is all the reference I need," Sarah interrupted firmly. "Besides, we could use someone with your experience in handling fine dining service. This place might look casual, but we have our share of posh customers from Canary Wharf." The salary was considerably less than what she'd earned at Blackwood Manor, but Sarah offered her flexible hours and promised to train her in various aspects of restaurant operations. "You mentioned wanting to learn the business side of things. Well, you'll get plenty of that here." That evening, Emma faced her family with the truth, or at least part of it. She told them she'd left her position at Blackwood Manor due to inappropriate behavior from her employer, letting them assume what they would. The pregnancy revelation she kept to herself for now, not ready to add to their burdens. "Oh, love," Catherine reached for her daughter's hand, her face lined with concern. "You did the right thing. We'll manage somehow. We always do." Tom and Lucy, showing maturity beyond their years, immediately offered to get part-time jobs to help. Emma hugged them tightly, fighting back tears. "No way. You focus on your studies. I've already found new work, and it's something I've always wanted to do." The first few weeks at the Riverside were exhausting but exhilarating. Emma threw herself into learning every aspect of the restaurant business, from inventory management to menu planning. The physical work helped keep her mind off Alexander and the mess she'd left behind. The morning sickness was challenging, but Sarah, who'd guessed Emma's condition within days, ensured she took regular breaks and stayed hydrated. The regular customers quickly grew to appreciate Emma's quiet efficiency and warm smile. Among them was Charlotte Wilson, a striking woman in her 40s who always arrived precisely at 1:15 p.m. on Tuesdays and Thursdays, ordering the same thing, soup of the day and a pot of Earl Grey tea. "You're new here," Charlotte observed one day as Emma cleared her table. "But you carry yourself like someone who's worked in service much longer." "I used to work in private household service," Emma replied carefully. Charlotte's sharp eyes noted Emma's slight hesitation. "Interesting. Have you ever considered legal action against your former employer?" Emma nearly dropped the teacup she was holding. "I'm sorry?" "I couldn't help but notice you're pregnant," Charlotte said quietly. And something tells me your sudden career change wasn't entirely voluntary. Heat rushed to Emma's cheeks. I'd rather not discuss it. Of course. Charlotte reached into her designer handbag and withdrew a business card. But if you ever change your mind, I work for Winters and Associates. We specialize in employment law, particularly cases involving workplace discrimination and harassment. Pro bono, for cases we believe in. Emma stared at the card, her heart racing. Why would you want to help me? Charlotte's expression softened. Let's just say I've seen too many powerful men abuse their positions. Sometimes they need to be reminded that their actions have consequences. That night, Emma lay awake in her narrow bed, Charlotte's card burning a hole in her bedside drawer. The thought of taking legal action against Alexander terrified her. His threats about making employment difficult had proved true. She'd already received rejection letters from several restaurants she'd applied to, despite her qualifications. But as her baby grew within her, so did her sense of injustice. This child deserved more than to be swept under the rug, treated like an inconvenience by their own father. And what about other women who might fall prey to Alexander's manipulations? The next morning, Emma arrived at the restaurant to find an unexpected ally. Marcus Chen, the new sous chef, took one look at her struggling with a heavy box of vegetables and immediately stepped in to help. "You shouldn't be lifting anything heavy in your condition," he scolded gently. "Why didn't you ask for help?" Over the following days, Marcus became her unofficial protector in the kitchen, always ensuring she took her breaks and ate properly. His quiet kindness reminded her that not all men were like Alexander. "My sister went through something similar," he confided one evening as they closed up the kitchen. "The father walked away, but she built a beautiful life for herself and my nephew. You will too." Emma touched her growing bump, now visible beneath her chef's whites. At 16 weeks, she could no longer hide her pregnancy from her family. The conversation with her mother had been difficult, but ultimately strengthening. "We're in this together," Catherine had declared, holding her daughter close. "This baby will be loved no matter what." As Emma prepared for another busy service, she found Charlotte's card in her pocket. Perhaps it was time to fight back, not just for herself or her baby, but for every woman who'd ever been made to feel powerless by men like Alexander Blackwood. Sarah caught her staring at the card during her break. "Whatever you're thinking of doing, know that you have support here. This place," she gestured around the warm, bustling kitchen, "this is your family now too." Emma smiled, tucking the card back into her pocket. Tomorrow she would call Charlotte Wilson's office, but tonight she had orders to prepare and customers to serve. One step at a time, she was rebuilding her life, discovering strength she never knew she possessed. The offices of Winters and Associates occupied the third floor of a converted Georgian building in Holborn. Emma sat in the reception area, nervously smoothing her dress over her growing bump, now prominent at 18 weeks. Charlotte Wilson's office was warm and inviting, with large windows overlooking the London streets below. "Tell me everything," Charlotte said, setting aside her laptop. From the beginning. For the next 2 hours, Emma recounted her story. The gradual progression of Alexander's attention, the gifts, the promises, and finally, the cruel dismissal. Charlotte listened intently, occasionally asking clarifying questions, but never judging. "You've kept the ultrasound image?" Charlotte asked, making notes. "Yes, and some of the checks he gave me, texts from his private number, and the necklace he bought me for my birthday." Charlotte's eyebrows rose appreciatively. "Good. Many women in your situation panic and destroy everything. We can work with this." She leaned forward, her expression serious. "But Emma, you need to understand what you're getting into. Alexander Blackwood isn't just wealthy. He's powerful. This will get ugly before it gets better." "I understand." Emma's hand rested protectively on her bump. "But this isn't just about me anymore." "No, it isn't," Charlotte smiled. "Now let's talk strategy. First, we'll file a wrongful termination suit. Then we'll pursue a paternity case. The law requires him to support his child, regardless of his marital status." As Charlotte outlined their legal approach, Emma's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Her blood ran cold as she read it. "Consider carefully before taking legal action. Accidents can happen in restaurant kitchens." Charlotte noticed her distress. "What is it?" Emma showed her the message. Charlotte's face hardened. "This is excellent news for us, actually. Harassment and intimidation will only strengthen our case. Forward me any communications you receive. Don't delete anything. Back at the riverside, Emma threw herself into her work with renewed determination. Sarah had promoted her to assistant manager, recognizing her keen eye for detail and natural leadership abilities. The regular customers had become like family, asking about her pregnancy and offering advice. Marcus continued to be her steadfast friend, teaching her the intricacies of professional cooking during quiet moments. "You have good instincts," he said one evening, as she experimented with a new sauce recipe. "You should think about culinary school after the baby comes." The legal proceedings moved slowly but steadily. Charlotte filed the initial paperwork, and as predicted, Alexander's legal team responded aggressively. They painted Emma as an opportunist, claiming she had manipulated her position to seduce a married man. "They're offering a settlement," Charlotte announced during one of their meetings. Quite generous too, but with a strict non-disclosure agreement. Emma shook her head firmly. "I won't be silenced. This isn't about money." "I hoped you'd say that," Charlotte grinned, "because I've found something interesting in Blackwood Industries' employment records. You're not the first young woman to leave their employment under mysterious circumstances." As autumn turned to winter, Emma's pregnancy progressed smoothly despite the stress. Her 20th week scan revealed she was having a girl. That evening, sitting with her mother in their small living room, Emma felt her daughter kick for the first time. "She's strong," Catherine smiled, her hand joining Emma's on her belly. "Like her mother." The next day, Victoria Blackwood made an unexpected appearance at the riverside. Emma was in the kitchen when Sarah came to fetch her, looking worried. "She's asking for you specifically," Sarah whispered. "You don't have to go out there." But Emma squared her shoulders and walked into the dining room. Victoria sat alone at a corner table, elegant as ever, in a cashmere suit. Her expression was unreadable as Emma approached. "Mrs. Blackwood," Emma said quietly, "how can I help you?" "Sit down, Miss Bennet." Victoria's voice was cool, but not unkind. "We need to talk." What followed was possibly the most surreal conversation of Emma's life. Victoria spoke with surprising candor about her marriage to Alexander, their separate lives, and her inability to have children, a fact that had strained their relationship for years. "I'm not here to threaten you," Victoria said, stirring her untouched tea. "Quite the opposite. I want to help." Emma stared at her in disbelief. "Why would you want to help me?" "Because I've spent 20 years watching Alexander treat people like chess pieces to be moved around at his convenience. Perhaps it's time someone showed him he can't always control the game." Victoria reached into her handbag and withdrew a USB drive. "This contains some information that might interest your lawyer. Financial records, emails, evidence of previous incidents that were handled quietly." Emma's hands trembled as she accepted the drive. "I don't understand. This could ruin your marriage." Victoria's laugh was bitter but dignified. "My dear, that marriage exists only on paper, and we both know it. I've built my own life, my own happiness. Maybe it's time you fought for yours." After Victoria left, Emma sat for a long moment, the USB drive heavy in her pocket. When she finally returned to the kitchen, Marcus took one look at her face and pulled her into a warm hug. "You okay?" he asked softly. Emma nodded, feeling her daughter kick again. "Yes, I think I am. For the first time in a long while, I really think I am." The January wind whistled through the streets of London as Emma hurried into Charlotte's office, now 6 months pregnant and glowing despite the mounting pressure. The USB drive from Victoria had proved to be a goldmine of information, revealing a pattern of behavior that spanned years. "We've located 3 other women," Charlotte announced, spreading files across her desk. "All former employees of Blackwood Industries, all quietly dismissed with generous severance packages. 2 are willing to testify." Emma studied the photographs of the women, all young, all in subordinate positions, when they caught Alexander's attention. How did he keep this quiet for so long? Money, power, fear. Charlotte's expression was grim. But that's about to change. Victoria's documents show the settlements came from company funds, misreported as operational expenses. The board of directors won't be pleased about that. Just then, Charlotte's assistant burst in. "Turn on the news, now." The wall-mounted television flickered to life, showing Alexander Blackwood standing outside Blackwood Industries headquarters, his arm around Victoria. The headline scrolling beneath read, "Tech mogul announces major charity initiative for single mothers." My wife and I are deeply committed to supporting vulnerable women in our community. Alexander's voice filled the room, smooth and practiced. The Blackwood Foundation will provide education and employment opportunities for single mothers struggling to support their families. Emma felt her stomach turn. Charlotte switched off the television with a harsh laugh. Classic deflection strategy. Try to paint himself as a champion of women's rights before the scandal breaks. She turned to Emma. This is good news, actually. He's worried. Later that day at the riverside, Emma found it hard to concentrate. The morning sickness had returned with a vengeance, and her ankles were swollen from standing. Marcus noticed her discomfort and insisted she take a break. Sit, he ordered, pulling out a chair in the empty dining room. I made you some ginger tea. As Emma sipped the soothing beverage, Marcus sat beside her. Their shoulders touched, and she found herself leaning into his warmth. Over the past months, his friendship had become a cornerstone of her new life. He never pressed for details about her past, but was always there with quiet support and understanding. I saw the news, he said softly. Are you okay? I don't know, Emma admitted. Sometimes I wonder if I'm doing the right thing, taking on someone so powerful. What if... Her words were cut short by a sharp pain in her abdomen. She gasped, clutching her belly. Emma! Marcus's voice was alarmed. Something's wrong, she whispered, panic rising in her throat. The baby! What followed was a blur of activity. Marcus called an ambulance while Sarah appeared with a cold compress and soothing words. Within minutes, Emma was being rushed to the Royal London Hospital, Marcus holding her hand the entire way. Hours later, Emma lay in a hospital bed, monitors beeping steadily. The doctors had managed to stop the premature contractions, but she was ordered to complete bed rest for at least 2 weeks. Her daughter was safe, but the warning had been clear. She needed to reduce her stress levels. Charlotte visited the next morning, bringing flowers and determination. This changes nothing, she insisted. We can postpone your court appearances. The other women can testify first. No, Emma's voice was firm. I won't hide. That's what he wants. Emma, Marcus stepped forward from where he'd been quietly standing guard since her admission. You don't have to prove anything. Your health and the baby's safety come first. She reached for his hand, drawing strength from his presence. I'm not proving anything. I'm standing up for what's right. For my daughter, and for every other woman he's hurt. That evening, as visiting hours drew to a close, Marcus lingered by her bedside. I should go, he said reluctantly, but I don't want to leave you alone. Emma studied his face, the kindness in his dark eyes, the worry line between his brows. You've been here for 24 hours straight. Go home, get some rest. Someone should stay with you. I'll be fine. The nurses... I'll stay. A new voice interrupted. They looked up to find Mrs. Hudson in the doorway, still in her Blackwood Manor uniform. Mary called me. I came as soon as I could get away. Emma felt tears well up at the sight of her former mentor. Mrs. Hudson shooed Marcus away with promises to call if anything changed, then settled into the chair beside Emma's bed. Now then, she said, taking Emma's hand, tell me everything you haven't been telling your mother. And so, in the quiet hospital room with monitors beeping softly in the background, Emma finally let all her fears and hopes pour out. Mrs. Hudson listened, occasionally wiping away her own tears. As Emma spoke about the loneliness of her position at Blackwood Manor, her fear during the early days of pregnancy, and her growing feelings for Marcus, feelings she was afraid to acknowledge. Love comes when we least expect it, Mrs. Hudson said wisely. Sometimes the best things in life grow from the ashes of our hardest times. As Emma drifted off to sleep that night, one hand resting on her bump where her daughter kicked gently, she felt a strange sense of peace. The storm wasn't over. In many ways it was just beginning, but she was no longer facing it alone. The February morning dawned crisp and clear as Emma made her way into the Royal Courts of Justice, her 7-month pregnant belly prominent beneath her conservative navy dress. The grand Victorian Gothic architecture loomed above her, its limestone walls witness to countless battles for justice over the centuries. Charlotte walked beside her, carrying a sleek briefcase filled with evidence gathered over the past months. Behind them came Marcus, who had taken the day off from the riverside to show his support. Mrs. Hudson had arrived early to save them seats, defying her employers to be there. Remember, Charlotte whispered as they approached the courtroom, stay calm no matter what their lawyers say. They'll try to provoke you, make you seem unstable or vindictive. Don't let them. Emma nodded, taking deep breaths just as her prenatal yoga instructor had taught her. Her daughter, as if sensing her mother's anxiety, gave a reassuring kick. The courtroom fell silent as Alexander and Victoria Blackwood entered, followed by their team of expensive lawyers. Alexander's face was impassive, but Emma caught the slight tightening of his jaw when he saw her. Victoria, surprisingly, gave Emma a nearly imperceptible nod. The preliminary hearing began with Alexander's legal team presenting their defense. They painted a picture of Emma as a calculating social climber who had deliberately pursued a married man, suggesting she had engineered the pregnancy to extort money from the Blackwood family. "Miss Bennett," their lead lawyer began his cross-examination, "isn't it true that you researched Mr. Blackwood's net worth before accepting employment at Blackwood Manor?" "No," Emma replied steadily. "I applied for the position through an agency. I needed work to support my family." "And you regularly worked late hours, specifically when Mr. Blackwood was home alone?" "I worked the hours assigned to me by Mrs. Hudson, the head housekeeper." "Yet you found yourself alone with Mr. Blackwood frequently?" "He was my employer. When he requested tea or assistance in his study, it was my job to comply." The questioning continued, growing increasingly hostile. Emma maintained her composure, even as they delved into her private life and financial circumstances. She could feel Marcus tensing behind her with each insinuation, his protective instincts clearly struggling against the formal setting. Then came the moment that changed everything. Charlotte presented Victoria's evidence, not just the documentation of previous settlements, but email exchanges showing Alexander's deliberate pattern of targeting vulnerable employees. "Furthermore," Charlotte addressed the court, "we have testimony from 2 other former employees who experienced similar treatment." She gestured to the back of the courtroom where 2 well-dressed women stood. Emma recognized them from the photographs, Jennifer Hayes and Rebecca Morton, both former assistants at Blackwood Industries. Alexander's facade cracked slightly as he saw them. His lawyer requested a brief recess, which the judge granted. In the hallway, Emma leaned against the wall, exhausted but determined. "You're doing brilliantly," Marcus murmured, offering her water and a granola bar. "How are you feeling?" "Like I could sleep for a week," she admitted. "But I'm okay. We're okay." She touched her bump meaningfully. Mrs. Hudson appeared with a thermos of chamomile tea. "Your mother just texted me. She's watching Tom and Lucy, but she's praying for you." When the session resumed, there was a subtle shift in the atmosphere. Alexander's legal team's aggressive stance had softened, and they began making overtures about reaching a settlement. "No," Emma said firmly when Charlotte relayed their offer during another recess. "I want this on record. I want them to have to acknowledge what he did." The day wore on with testimony from Jennifer and Rebecca, painting a damning picture of Alexander's behavior pattern. Victoria sat stone-faced through it all, occasionally making notes that she passed to her own lawyer, whom Emma realized with a start was operating independently from Alexander's team. By late afternoon, Emma was struggling to focus through her fatigue. The judge, noticing her discomfort, called an end to the day's proceedings. As the court emptied, Emma caught Alexander staring at her belly with an unreadable expression. Outside, the February sunset painted the London sky in shades of pink and gold. Marcus insisted on driving Emma home, while Charlotte stayed behind to handle additional paperwork. "I don't think I've ever been so proud of anyone," Marcus said quietly as they sat in evening traffic. "You were amazing in there." Emma turned to look at him, really look at him for the first time that day. The setting sun caught the warmth in his dark eyes, the gentle curve of his smile. Without thinking, she reached for his hand. "Thank you," she whispered. "For everything." His fingers intertwined with hers, warm and steady. "Emma, But before he could finish, Emma's phone buzzed with an incoming text. It was from Victoria Blackwood. "Meet me tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. the Riverside. There's something you need to know." Emma stared at the message, her heart racing. What more could Victoria possibly reveal? And why now, when they seemed to be making progress in court? As if sensing her mother's anxiety, the baby gave another strong kick. Emma breathed deeply, centering herself. Whatever tomorrow brought, she would face it with the same strength she'd shown today. Her daughter deserved nothing less. The Riverside was eerily quiet at 9 the next morning, hours before its usual opening time. Emma sat at a corner table, nursing a cup of herbal tea, while Marcus busied himself in the kitchen, refusing to leave her alone for the meeting with Victoria. The bell above the door chimed precisely at 9. Victoria Blackwood entered, looking immaculate as always in a tailored grey suit, but Emma noticed something different about her demeanour, a vulnerability she'd never shown before. "Thank you for meeting me," Victoria said, settling into the chair opposite Emma. She placed an old leather portfolio on the table between them. "What I'm about to tell you, it's not easy for me." Marcus appeared silently with a pot of Earl Grey tea, Victoria's usual order. She smiled faintly at his thoughtfulness. 23 years ago, Victoria began, her manicured fingers tracing the edge of the portfolio, "I was in a position not unlike yours. I worked as a junior accountant at Blackwood Industries when Alexander was taking over from his father. I was young, ambitious, and completely taken in by his charm." Emma's hand instinctively went to her bump as understanding began to dawn. "I became pregnant," Victoria continued, her voice steady despite the pain in her eyes. "Alexander's father was still alive then, very traditional, concerned about the company's reputation. Alexander convinced me that marriage was the only solution. He said he loved me, that we'd build a life together." She opened the portfolio, revealing old photographs and documents. "The pregnancy. There were complications. I lost the baby in my 6th month. After that I couldn't—" She paused, composing herself. "I couldn't have any more children. Alexander's father passed away shortly after, and suddenly our marriage of convenience became a business arrangement. Alexander got his respectable wife, and I got financial security." "Why are you telling me this now?" Emma asked softly. "Because history has a way of repeating itself." Victoria's expression hardened. "I found these last night." She pulled out a stack of papers. "Recent transfers from company accounts to a private bank in the Cayman Islands. Alexander's preparing to liquidate assets, move money where it can't be traced. He's planning to leave the country." Emma felt the blood drain from her face. "But the court case is just a minor inconvenience to him. He's already arranging to step down as CEO, claiming health reasons. Once the money's gone—" Victoria's implication hung heavy in the air. "He can't just run away from his responsibilities," Emma protested. "No, he can't," Victoria agreed, sliding the financial documents across the table. "That's why I'm giving you these. Take them to your lawyer immediately. And Emma—" She hesitated, then reached into her bag and withdrew an envelope. "This is a copy of our prenuptial agreement. There's a clause. If either party engages in behavior that brings public scandal to the Blackwood name, they forfeit their claim to company shares." Emma stared at her in disbelief. "You're willing to risk your own security?" "I've spent 23 years watching Alexander destroy lives while I stayed silent. Perhaps it's time I faced my own complicity." Victoria stood, smoothing her suit. "Besides, I've built my own investment portfolio over the years. I'll be fine." As she turned to leave, she paused. "One more thing. The board of directors is meeting this afternoon. Anonymous tips about financial irregularities have a way of spreading quickly in the city." After Victoria left, Emma sat in stunned silence until Marcus joined her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You heard everything?" she asked. He nodded. "Sarah's already called Charlotte. She's on her way." Emma looked down at the documents before her, evidence of not just financial misconduct, but of a pattern of behavior spanning decades. Her daughter kicked vigorously, as if urging her mother to action. "Marcus," she said suddenly, turning to face him, "I need you to help me with something before Charlotte arrives." Hours later, Emma sat in Charlotte's office watching her lawyer pore over the documents. Outside, the financial news was already reporting on unusual trading activity in Blackwood Industries shares. "This changes everything," Charlotte said, looking up with fierce satisfaction. "The board can't ignore financial fraud. And with Victoria's testimony—" "Will it be enough?" Emma asked. "More than enough. But Emma, are you sure about going public with Victoria's story? The media attention will be intense." Emma thought of Victoria's courage in breaking her silence, of the other women who had come forward. "Some stories need to be told," she said firmly, "for all the women who couldn't tell theirs." That evening, as Emma prepared for bed, her phone lit up with a news alert. Alexander Blackwood had been asked to take an immediate leave of absence pending an internal investigation. The board had appointed an interim CEO. As she read the news, another message came through, from Marcus. "Just saw the news. You never cease to amaze me. Dinner tomorrow? There's something I've been wanting to talk to you about." Emma smiled, her hand resting on her bump where her daughter moved restlessly. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. But for now she allowed herself to feel a glimmer of hope, not just for justice, but for the possibility of happiness she hadn't dared imagine before. The next few weeks passed in a whirlwind of legal proceedings and media attention. The story had exploded across British newspapers. Tech mogul's empire crumbles amid scandal. Blackwood Industries CEO faces multiple investigations. Whistleblower wife exposes years of corporate misconduct. Emma, now approaching her 8th month of pregnancy, found unexpected sanctuary in the Riverside's bustling kitchen. Sarah had insisted on keeping her on administrative duties only, giving her a comfortable office space where she could manage the restaurant's books while staying off her swollen feet. The evening Marcus had promised dinner turned into something more intimate than either had expected. He'd closed the restaurant early, cooking a special meal just for them in the quiet kitchen. "I've been wanting to tell you something for a while now," Marcus said, his usually confident demeanor tinged with nervousness as he served a perfectly plated risotto. But with everything going on, it never seemed like the right time. Emma felt her heart flutter as he sat beside her closer than usual. "What is it?" "I'm in love with you," he said simply, his dark eyes earnest. "I think I have been since that first week you started here, looking so lost but so determined to start over. I know the timing is complicated with the baby and the case, but I needed you to know." Emma's eyes filled with tears. Hormones, she told herself, but knowing it was more than that. "Marcus, You don't have to say anything," he hurried to add. "I just wanted you to know that whatever happens, I'm here, for you and for the baby, in whatever way you'll have me." She reached for his hand, intertwining their fingers. "I think I'm falling in love with you too," she whispered. "And it terrifies me." His other hand came up to cup her cheek. "Why does it terrify you?" "Because the last time I trusted my heart—" "I'm not him," Marcus said firmly. "I never will be." Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, full of promise rather than demands. When they finally pulled apart, Emma's daughter gave a strong kick, making them both laugh. "I think she approves," Emma smiled, placing Marcus's hand on her belly to feel the movement. The quiet joy of that evening sustained Emma through the storm that followed. Alexander's attorneys had launched an aggressive counter-offensive, trying to paint Victoria as mentally unstable and Emma as part of a conspiracy to destroy Blackwood Industries. But the evidence was insurmountable. More women came forward, not just from Blackwood Industries, but from other companies where Alexander had served on the board. The financial investigations revealed a pattern of misappropriated funds stretching back years. Charlotte was in her element, coordinating with corporate investigators and the press. "The board is facing shareholder pressure to settle quickly," she reported during one of their meetings. "They want to avoid a prolonged scandal." Emma's mother, Catherine, had become her strongest advocate, defending her daughter fiercely to any neighbors who dared whisper about the scandal. Tom and Lucy proudly showed their friends the newspaper articles about their sister standing up to corporate corruption. Mrs. Hudson continued to work at Blackwood Manor, now a vital source of information about Alexander's increasingly erratic behavior. "He barely leaves his study anymore," she reported during one of her regular visits to the Riverside. "Victoria has moved permanently to their Sussex estate." One rainy evening, as Emma and Marcus closed up the restaurant, Sarah approached them with an unexpected proposition. "I'm thinking of opening a second location," she announced, "and I want you both to run it." "What?" Emma stared at her mentor in surprise. "You've revolutionized our business operations, Emma. And Marcus, you've transformed our menu. The new place would be yours to manage as you see fit. I'll provide the capital, but you'll have creative control." Marcus squeezed Emma's hand. "What do you think?" Emma thought about how far she'd come from that terrified young woman who'd fled Blackwood Manor. She thought about the daughter growing inside her, who would need an example of strength and independence. And she thought about the man beside her, who had shown her what real love and support looked like. "I think," she said slowly, "that sometimes the best dreams are the ones we never dared to imagine." Later that night, curled up on Marcus's comfortable couch in his flat above the restaurant, Emma felt her daughter's increasingly active movements. Marcus had been reading pregnancy books, learning about fetal development and birthing techniques. His coffee table was covered with pamphlets about childbirth classes and baby care. "I've been thinking," he said, running his fingers through her hair as she rested against his chest. "The new restaurant. What if we made it more than just a business? What if it could be a place that helps other women start over like you did?" Emma turned to look at him, overwhelmed by the depth of understanding in his suggestion. This was what real partnership looked like. Someone who not only supported your dreams, but helped them grow into something even more meaningful. "Marcus Chen," she said softly, "I think I just fell a little more in love with you." His answering smile was interrupted by a call from Charlotte. The board of Blackwood Industries had called an emergency meeting. Tomorrow would change everything. The board meeting at Blackwood Industries lasted for hours. Emma waited in Charlotte's office, Marcus by her side, as updates trickled in through Victoria's contacts. Outside, reporters gathered in anticipation of an announcement. "The board has voted," Charlotte burst in, her face flushed with excitement. "Alexander's been removed as CEO, effective immediately. They're offering a comprehensive settlement to all affected parties to avoid further scandal." Emma sat still, absorbing the news. "And the conditions. Full admission of wrongdoing, financial support for the child through a trust fund that he can't touch or control. Their public apology." Charlotte's smile was triumphant. "Plus, they're establishing a foundation independent from the company to support workplace harassment victims. They want you on the board of trustees." The gravity of the moment washed over Emma. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about creating lasting change. Her daughter kicked vigorously as if celebrating. "There's more," Charlotte continued, her expression softening. "Alexander's resigned from all his positions. He's checking into a private medical facility in Switzerland. Victoria sent this." She handed Emma a sealed envelope. Inside was a handwritten note from Alexander. "Emma, words cannot undo the harm I've caused. My behavior was inexcusable. The child, our daughter, deserves better than the legacy of pain I've created. I'm seeking help to understand why I've hurt so many people. I don't ask for forgiveness, only the chance to someday make amends. Alexander." Marcus read the note over her shoulder, his hand protective on her back. "Are you okay?" Emma folded the letter carefully. "Yes, I think I am. For the first time, I really am." That evening, the riverside was closed for a private celebration. Sarah had prepared a feast, and the small restaurant was filled with the people who had become Emma's extended family. Mrs. Hudson arrived with happy tears, having finally given her notice at Blackwood Manor. Charlotte raised a toast to justice, while Emma's mother beamed with pride. In a quiet moment, Marcus led Emma to the restaurant's small garden, now blooming with early spring flowers. The London sky was unusually clear, stars twinkling above them. "I've been thinking about names for the new restaurant," he said, taking her hands in his. "What about New Beginnings?" Emma smiled, touching her bump. "It's perfect." Speaking of new beginnings, Marcus dropped to one knee, producing a small velvet box. "I know it might seem soon, but when you know, you know. Emma Bennett, will you marry me?" The ring was simple but beautiful, a delicate sapphire surrounded by tiny diamonds. Emma felt tears spring to her eyes as she looked at this wonderful man who had helped her rebuild her life. "Yes," she whispered, 1,000 times yes. Their kiss was interrupted by applause. Their entire extended family had witnessed the moment through the garden windows. Sarah was crying openly, while Mrs. Hudson and Catherine hugged each other. Tom and Lucy made gagging faces at the romance of it all, though Lucy was secretly wiping away tears. Later that night, as Emma prepared for bed in her flat, soon to be their flat, she felt a profound sense of peace. Her daughter was due in just over a month. The new restaurant would open in the summer, and she had found love she could trust. Her phone buzzed with a message from Victoria. "Congratulations on everything. You've helped more people than you know. The foundation board meets next month. We have work to do." Emma smiled, remembering how far she'd come from that terrified young woman who had fled Blackwood Manor. Her hand rested on her belly, feeling her daughter's movements. "Your story will be different," she whispered to her unborn child. "You'll grow up knowing your worth, surrounded by love and strength." Marcus's key turned in the lock. He'd insisted on staying over more often as her due date approached. "Everything okay?" he asked, finding her lost in thought. "Everything's perfect," she said, reaching for his hand. "We're exactly where we're meant to be." Outside, London hummed with its usual nighttime energy, but in that moment, their world was complete. Tomorrow would bring new challenges: planning a wedding, opening a restaurant, welcoming their daughter, building a foundation to help others. But tonight, they had each other, and that was more than enough. The early April morning brought sunshine streaming through the windows of Emma and Marcus's newly renovated flat above the riverside. At 9 months pregnant, Emma stood in what would soon be the nursery, surrounded by soft yellow walls and hand-painted butterflies, a weekend project Marcus had undertaken with surprising artistic skill. "The mobile's crooked again," she called out, eyeing the delicate arrangement of paper cranes that Sarah had crafted for the baby. "Leave it," Marcus appeared in the doorway, still in his chef's apron. "You're supposed to be resting." "Doctor's orders," Emma sighed, lowering herself into the comfortable rocking chair by the window. "I can't help it. Everything needs to be perfect before she arrives." The past month had been a whirlwind of preparations, both for the baby and the new restaurant. New Beginnings was taking shape in a beautiful converted warehouse in Greenwich, just a few streets away from the riverside. Sarah had outdone herself with the renovation plans, creating a space that would be both a successful business and a sanctuary for women starting over. As if on cue, Emma's phone buzzed with a message from Charlotte. The foundation's first meeting had gone well, with Victoria proving to be an unexpectedly passionate advocate for workplace reform. Already 3 other companies had approached them about implementing new harassment prevention programs. "The contractor called," Marcus said, massaging Emma's shoulders. "The training kitchen at New Beginnings will be ready next month. We can start the employment program as soon as we open." Emma smiled, thinking of their plans to offer culinary training and job opportunities to women rebuilding their lives. The restaurant would be more than just a business. It would be a testament to the power of second chances. A sharp pain interrupted her thoughts. She gasped, clutching her belly. "Emma!" Marcus was instantly alert. "I think," she breathed through the contraction, "I think it's time." What followed was a carefully orchestrated chaos. Marcus called the hospital while Emma called her mother. Within minutes, Mrs. Hudson appeared. She'd been staying nearby, determined not to miss the birth. Sarah took charge of the restaurant, promising to keep everyone updated. At the hospital, Emma's labor progressed steadily. Marcus never left her side, his calm presence anchoring her through each contraction. Catherine and Mrs. Hudson took turns providing support, while Tom and Lucy waited excitedly in the family room, updating a seemingly endless stream of well-wishers. "You're doing brilliantly," the midwife encouraged as evening approached. "Not long now." Emma gripped Marcus's hand tighter as another contraction peaked. Through the pain, she felt an overwhelming sense of rightness. This was how her daughter should come into the world, surrounded by love and support, with no shadows of the past darkening her arrival. Just before midnight, after hours of labor, a powerful cry filled the delivery room. The midwife placed a tiny, perfect baby girl on Emma's chest. "Hello, little one," Emma whispered, tears streaming down her face. "We've been waiting for you." Marcus kissed Emma's forehead, his own eyes wet. "She's beautiful, just like her mother." Later, as Emma rested in her private room, a gift from Victoria, she watched Marcus holding their daughter with infinite tenderness. They'd chosen to name her Grace Hope Chen Bennett, a name that spoke of both resilience and possibility. Catherine sat on the edge of the bed, holding her granddaughter's tiny hand. "She has your eyes, Emma." "And Marcus's calm disposition, thank goodness," Emma laughed softly. She barely cried after that first announcement. Mrs. Hudson appeared with a basket of essentials she'd thoughtfully prepared: comfortable clothes for Emma, snacks, and a hand-knitted blanket for Grace. "The first of many cuddle blankets," she promised. Sarah poked her head in, having closed the riverside early to visit. "The kitchen staff sent their love, and about a week's worth of meals for when you get home." "And this arrived for you." Catherine handed Emma an envelope. Inside was a brief note from Victoria. "Welcome to the world, Grace Hope. Your trust fund will ensure you have every opportunity in life, but your mother's strength will teach you what really matters. You are already so loved." Emma looked around the room at her chosen family, Marcus gazing adoringly at their daughter, her mother, and Mrs. Hudson fussing with the blankets, Sarah already planning the baby's first visit to the restaurants. This was everything she'd never dared to dream of during those dark days at Blackwood Manor. Grace made a small sound, and Marcus brought her back to Emma's arms. As she held her daughter, Emma felt the last pieces of her heart healing. The journey hadn't been easy, but every step had led her here, to this moment of pure joy. "You know what this means," Marcus said softly, perching on the bed beside them. "Our family's complete now. All we need is the wedding." Emma smiled, remembering the simple summer ceremony they'd planned in the Riverside's garden. 3 months to go. Think you can handle 2 such demanding women in your life? "I can't imagine anything better," he replied, kissing them both gently. Outside, London's lights twinkled beneath a star-filled sky, and Emma felt a profound sense of gratitude. Her daughter would grow up knowing only love and strength, surrounded by people who understood the true meaning of family. The July evening was perfect for a garden wedding. The Riverside's courtyard had been transformed into an enchanted space, with fairy lights twinkling in the trees and white roses climbing the ancient brick walls. 3-month-old Grace slept peacefully in Catherine's arms, wearing a tiny dress that matched her mother's simple but elegant wedding gown. "Ready?" Mrs. Hudson asked, adjusting Emma's veil one last time. The older woman had insisted on taking charge of the wedding preparations, treating Emma like the daughter she'd never had. Emma took a deep breath, looking at her reflection. The woman in the mirror bore little resemblance to the frightened maid who had fled Blackwood Manor just over a year ago. Her eyes were bright with happiness, her posture confident and strong. "More than ready," she smiled. The ceremony was everything they'd wanted, intimate, joyful, and full of love. Marcus waited beneath an arch of flowers, his face lighting up as Emma walked down the aisle on Tom's proud arm. Lucy, now 15, played the violin beautifully, bringing tears to everyone's eyes. Sarah served as Marcus's best woman, while Charlotte stood as Emma's matron of honor. The guests were a mix of family, restaurant staff, and the growing network of women who had found support through their foundation. Even Victoria attended quietly, sitting in the back and smiling genuinely at the happiness evident on every face. "I take you, Emma Bennet," Marcus's voice was steady as he spoke his vows, "as my partner in all things. I promise to support your dreams, share your burdens, and love both you and Grace with everything I am." Emma's own vows came straight from her heart. "I take you, Marcus Chen, as my husband and best friend. You showed me what real love looks like, patient, kind, and strengthening. I promise to face every adventure by your side, building our family with trust and joy." The reception was held in New Beginnings, opening its doors for the first time. The renovated warehouse space was stunning, with high ceilings, exposed brick, and warm lighting. The open kitchen, where they would soon begin their training program, gleamed with new equipment. Sarah had outdone herself with the menu, combining British classics with Marcus's innovative Asian fusion dishes. The wedding cake was a joint creation of the Riverside's pastry chef and one of their first trainee chefs, a young single mother who had found her calling in the kitchen. During the speeches, Charlotte raised her glass with pride. "A year ago, Emma showed us all what courage looks like. Today, she shows us what happiness looks like. To Emma and Marcus, may your love continue to inspire others." Mrs. Hudson's toast brought both laughter and tears. "I knew the moment Emma walked into my kitchen that she was special. Marcus, you're a lucky man, though I take full credit for teaching her how to make a proper cup of tea." As the evening progressed, Emma took a moment to nurse Grace in the quiet of her new office at New Beginnings. The walls were decorated with framed press clippings about the foundation's work and photographs of their growing family. Through the window, she could see the party continuing in the main restaurant space, Marcus charming their guests, as he always did. Victoria knocked softly before entering. "I wanted to give you this before I left," she said, handing Emma an envelope. "It's the deed to the Sussex estate. Alexander signed it over to the foundation before he left. I thought perhaps it could become a retreat center, a place for women to heal and plan their next chapters." Emma blinked back tears, touched by the gesture. "Thank you, Victoria, for everything." "No," Victoria smiled, gently touching Grace's cheek. "Thank you. You gave me the courage to finally write my own story." Later, as they swayed to their first dance as husband and wife, Marcus held Emma close. Happy? Perfectly, she replied, watching Grace being adored by her extended family. Tom was showing her off to Sarah's nephew, while Lucy captured everything on her phone. Catherine and Mrs. Hudson sat together, already planning Grace's first birthday party. The next morning, Emma and Marcus would leave for a brief honeymoon in the Cotswolds, their first family holiday with Grace. When they returned, New Beginnings would officially open its doors, ready to offer both excellent food and life-changing opportunities to women seeking fresh starts. But for now, in this moment, Emma simply savored the feeling of being in her husband's arms, surrounded by the love of their chosen family. Her journey had begun with heartbreak, but it had led her to something far more precious than she could have imagined, a life built on truth, strength, and the kind of love that lifts others up. As the summer night wrapped around them like a warm embrace, Emma knew with absolute certainty that this was just the beginning of their most beautiful chapter yet.